I know it's been a while, but I finally got the lower receiver, the trigger, the safety, all that's working great. It's pretty much finalized. I'm going to go over all that in the video. I'm also going to go over a couple of HPA units, what you're able to use, drop them in, show you how easy it is to install, test them out, and just go over everything you see. So if you're interested in the MRK19 Bullpup kit, definitely stay tuned. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff on this table. Probably looks confusing, but don't worry, by the end of the video you'll understand what all these things do, how it's assembled, how it all works, because this is a fairly new trigger design. You usually don't see this in Airsoft, so I'll go over how it works. And then, like I said, I'm going to be testing these HPA units for you guys. So this consists of three main things that I've made. The lower receiver, the trigger group, which is the trigger and trigger guard, and then the safety. Here we have the lower receiver machined out of 6061 billet, pretty much bare bones. There's a few holes. I'll go over the purpose of those. You see a slot on both sides, and there's attached screws back here. I haven't gone over the screws and the slots yet, but I'm trying to implement a feature that's going to make assembly and disassembly a whole lot easier for you guys. So these screws are going to be fixed. You're not going to be removing them. They're going to stay just like this. The upper receiver is going to have hanging screws as well, just upside down. So when you assemble, it's going to slide forward, and the head of the screw is going to grab onto the edge of that slot, and that's going to keep the lower receiver from pulling down. The same thing is going to happen back here. When this gets into position, the head of the screw is going to hold on to the inside of the upper receiver. So I have yet to cut the slots for the screws, but the head is actually going to lock in like it would. So pull it back, and now that thing is locked and you can't move it up and down. When the slots are in, it'll also prevent it from moving left and right, but right now they're not in there. And then when you disassemble the gun, you're just going to move it away from those slots, and the whole thing's going to come apart. It may look a little confusing right now because it's kind of all in my head. You really can't see much. But when I go ahead and assemble more of the gun, you'll see what I'm talking about, and hopefully you guys will appreciate that there's no longer loose hardware. You're not going to be losing bolts and worrying about when you take things off where you're putting them. It's all going to stay fixed. It's all going to be slide in and like pin mechanism. So that's the lower receiver. This is the trigger unit, so the trigger and trigger guard. There's a lot going on here as well. You got 4 mounting holes, 2 in the front, 2 in the back to mount to the lower receiver. The trigger is mounted through the center bolt hole. It's threaded on this side. 1 long bolt up front attached to the trigger. This is magnetic. I'll go over the reasoning behind that. And then there's one in the back here, which the return spring goes on, so it pulls the trigger back down to operational position. This also doubles as the activator for the MILSIM valve, but when I go ahead and install that, I'll show you what it does. And then 1 more bolt, it's for adjusting. I'll go over that in depth when we get to it. The last bit of parts that I've made is the safety mechanism. It's just a little dial mechanism, kind of like the P90, but it's more ergonomic. There's a couple of adjustment screws, see here, and then there's a ball that's under spring pressure, and that's what gives it that clicky feel when you adjust it from semi to safe. You can see with the safety and trigger guard next to each other that the safety has opposing holes where the ball and spring goes into, and then opposing holes on the trigger guard. So when you adjust it from safe to semi, that ball drops down into either one of these holes. I have them doubled up because I wasn't sure if I needed 2 or 1, but as you can see, I only have 1 in right now, and that's just enough pressure, gives it a nice positive click, and also holds it into place. So to install it, keep it facing up with that ball on the top side, and very carefully insert it into position, like so, and then flip it over. Like I said, when you swap it from semi to safe, it's not on the gun right now, so there's no pressure holding it down, but you get that nice positive click going in between the two, and that ball holds it into position. On the top side of the safety, you can see the 2 adjustment screws for semi and safe. So right now the gun is in semi, and the adjustment screw lines up perfectly with the trigger, and then when the gun goes over to safe, that other screw drops down, and this is your safety adjustment. So let's say your trigger is resting right here. You would take that screw through the bottom and adjust it. This middle one here, Allen wrench goes right through, you can adjust that safety. That way, when you click it to safe, you move the screw all the way up until it touches the screw that's on the trigger. That way you can't pull it. And then when you go over to semi, you see that screw is a lot shorter. So let's say this is safe resting position. Then it allows you to pull the gun for operation. And we go back over to safe. That screw drops right under that trigger bolt again and keeps it from shooting. When I go ahead and install one of the HPA units and tune it, I'll go more in depth on the adjustment, how to turn it. But I needed an adjustable safety because this trigger is adjustable from start to finish. So if the trigger is all the way back, it's possible that you can still pull it on safe. So with this adjustable safety bolt, you set your trigger where you want to start at, and then you move that bolt up until it pretty much touches that trigger bolt. The last screw you see here is the trigger start point adjustment screw, and that's where the magnet comes in. So this magnet drops into this lower receiver, and the screw moves this magnet up and down, and that's what holds the trigger in its resting position. So when you adjust this screw up, it moves the magnet higher up, and then it makes the trigger start further back. And then when you pull this screw down, that's where the spring comes in and pushes the trigger down. And this is how you adjust where the trigger starts and stops. And then the magnet is the simulated brake. So let's say the trigger set right here. When you pull it, it's going to want to come off that magnet, and then when you let go, it's going to click back up. It's not identical to real steel, but it's as close as you're going to get with HPA. Like I said with the other two adjustment screws, when I assemble and start tuning one of these, you'll see when I adjust each one what it does. But this is kind of the general idea how everything works. Before I get it in the gun, you won't be able to see any of this, so I want to give you guys a heads up with the magnet and the adjustment screws. The first engine that I'm going to be installing is the Redline N7 milsim, which uses the mechanical valve. Each one of these uses a different style of trigger engagement. So the F2, F1 jack, they all use your standard V2 board, and then the Wolverine Reaper, you're able to use a little micro switch. So I'm going to show all these, and that's fully capable. Also, the trigger's fully adjustable for each one of these units as well. Before we install the valve, I'm going to go ahead and drop the trigger guard onto the lower receiver. The easiest thing I found to do is pre-install this magnet already on the trigger bolt. If this is in the lower receiver, when you try to put everything together, that magnet's going to want to shoot out, and who knows where it's going to align at. With it already on the bolt, all I got to do is line the spring and the magnet up with this larger hole up here. Get that through, and then now you just got to worry about lining the trigger guard up, and it should drop like that. And take your two longer bolts. I'm only going to install two for the video's sake. Line those up. And there's the trigger guard, the semi-safe work. So the safe should be set up already. You can see you can't pull the trigger. Then when you go over to semi, it goes over to the 1. You're able to pull it back to safe. So now let's go ahead and install the milsim valve. The milsim valve is going to orient just like this. So you see these two little holes here. They're going to line up with these two bottom holes on the lower. Backside's threaded, and it uses these two bolts. So insert the milsim valve, line it up as best as possible, drop the bolts through. You can see it didn't go through. It's kind of tricky on camera. Maybe if I do it from the top here, it's a little bit better. Both of them, if they don't line up, just kind of wiggle it around a little bit until they go. Should go freely. If it's not, don't try to force it, but you'll eventually get both of them to go. And then there is your milsim valve installed, and let's go ahead and test it. Got the air hooked up to it. I think I'm running about 100 psi right now, but when the gun's in safe, no trigger pull, this is where you can adjust it. So before we adjust the safety, we need to adjust the trigger start. So let's go ahead and back the safety out just so we can show you how to adjust it. If it's backed out, gun's on safe, but you're able to pull the trigger. That's not good. So let's actually adjust the trigger where it starts first. I'm gonna back it out and see if I can get a little bit more of a shorter pull. When you loosen this screw up, you drop that magnet down, which means your trigger is going to start further forward in the cycle, which means a shorter trigger pull. So backing the screw out, that's too far. You can see the valve is all messed up now. That's pretty good right there. So with the gun still in safe, we're going to go ahead and we're going to screw this adjustment screw up until it hits that trigger screw, until it gets tight, and then probably about a quarter of a turn out. Now the trigger, you're not able to pull it on safety. And then in theory, if I did this right, go over to semi, works just fine. From here, we can adjust the trigger endpoint with the semi adjustment screw here. So with the gun in semi, you can see that's the current trigger pull. Not bad. If we take that screw, we can back it out. If you back it out, you get a longer trigger pull. So it should be a little bit longer. And then if we send that screw in, you get a shorter trigger pull. A little bit shorter, we can keep going. With the Milsim valve, you don't want to go too far and half pull the valve like I said, because you'll get a malfunction. Like so, you see the valve is no longer working. So we're going to back it up a little bit until the valve works. A little bit more, that didn't feel that great. And then we can adjust this one as well to get the perfect length, perfect feel trigger, fully adjustable, and then we go back over to safe. Safety works. Next up is the Wolverine Reaper with the micro switch. So let's go ahead and install that. The micro switch for the Reaper system is installed using these two smaller screws with these standoffs. The standoffs put it in the center of the lower receiver, you'll see when it's installed. The engagement piece goes on the bottom facing the trigger. If it's on the top, the trigger won't engage it, and if it's the other way around, it's just not going to work. So that engagement piece goes on the bottom, and it's kind of tricky doing this, especially on camera, but best thing I found to do is take the screws, install them through the other side first, and then your standoffs go on the opposite side over those screws. Should kind of look like this. That way when you drop it in, they line up with these threads on this side. 1, 2. And then on this side, it's the larger holes, lets the Allen wrench go through and lets you screw them in. So I'm gonna try to do this on camera, and I've already lost the screw. This is probably the trickier one of the three, just because of the moving parts when you assemble it. But once it's in, it's in. I'll move the lower to it. Yeah, that's a lot better. Now the tricky part of lining the screws up. Stick that Allen wrench in through the other side. And there we go. You can see the micro switch is pretty much centered. Now this micro switch is kind of a reverse switch. So when the switch is pushed, it's actually off. And then when the switch is disengaged, it's actually on, like the shoot. So right now the trigger is resting up against that switch, which means it's off. And then when you go over semi, it hops off of that switch and engages and lets you shoot. So let's go ahead and hook up air and let's adjust this trigger. Got the air hooked up, the battery, same PSI as the Milsim engine. I think it's like 100 PSI, something like that. Safety, still set up, still works. Over to semi, you can see when you pull the trigger, it disengages from that micro switch, which actually engages the valve. Then when you let go, it hits that micro switch and closes the system. So fully adjustable like before. The trigger start, if you send this up, you will get a longer trigger pull. And if we back it out, you get a shorter one. And then how to adjust the end point, same thing as before. And we're going to screw this one forward until we get a malfunction with the valve. See right there, it doesn't work. And then if we want to go even further, we can try to adjust that start one, back it out some more. Until it's reliable. So, just to show you guys how short of a trigger pull you can get. That's really short. Me personally, I don't like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and screw this first one in. I'm going to screw the end point out. Should give us a much better feeling trigger, to me at least, but to each their own, whatever you like. That is the Reaper with the micro switch safety. Oh, since we adjust that trigger start point, we need to readjust that safety. So we're going to screw that in. And now the safe has no wobble. Just a heads up, adjust the trigger first and then the safety afterwards. And then it should be set up right there. All right, F2, last one up. Last up is the Polarstar F2, which uses the standard V2 trigger board. So any V2 board will drop in. Your typical screw that goes in the normal spot, drop that in. I did remove the trigger guard for ease of install and use that screw and attach it just like you would inside of a V2 gearbox. So it's this larger one right here. There's enough room to get a screwdriver through. This one's a little tricky as well. Before you tighten it down all the way, there's the screw here that when you see it from the other side, there's the screw. That aligns your board up. So it's parallel. So before you tighten it down, you're going to want to push that board down into the screw and then tighten it up. That way when you tighten it, the top of the board is parallel with the lower receiver. Now we can go ahead and install the trigger guard onto it, but be careful. The V2 board has the little tiny plunger that activates the chute. It's really small and brittle. You want to make sure the trigger clears it when you install it. But same thing, install the magnet on the trigger beforehand. It's going to make it a lot easier. Line that magnet and spring up, and then make sure that trigger clears that plunger. If you want to pull the trigger guard back and make sure it clears, it should have enough room. And then install your two longer ones up here. Now we can go ahead and plug in the air, the battery, and the solenoids. Got everything hooked up. Obviously, this engine is going to be in the back of the gun with wire extensions, but let's go ahead and see where this is at. So safety should work because that's where the Reaper left off at. Semi. It works. Honestly, it doesn't feel that bad. But we can adjust it if we want. Same thing as before, that trigger start. Let's go ahead and back it out and see if we can get a shorter pull. Not too far. You can see the engine shot just by adjusting it. Not far enough. Let's take that trigger stop and let's screw that in. And we can get a very short crisp pull, or if you want it long and feel that trigger break, you can back this one out. You can turn this one in. You get a longer, sharper pull. Actually, a feature with this that I didn't go over yet, that first screw where the trigger starts, if you send this far enough in, that magnet will actually go past the point of engaging the trigger. So you'll lose that magnet force, and then it'll feel like just under spring pressure. So there's not going to be a click, you're just going to feel a spring. So let me go ahead and show you what I mean. Go even further. So that magnet is no longer felt. You see the gradual pull now? There's no longer a break. So if we take that magnet and let's back it out, back down to where it engages, that magnet is now hitting that trigger bolt again. So now we have that break. You can see basically a start and stop. And since we adjusted the trigger start, the safeties, yeah, it's not set up. It doesn't shoot, but it clicks, which isn't good. So now we're going to take that safety bolt and go up until it pretty much touches that. So now there's no trigger movement when it's in safe or a semi. And now this one's all set up. So that shows you how easy things can be. You can do it with each engine set up however you want, and it's fully adjustable from outside the gun. So even with the grip on there, you can adjust this through the trigger guard, and very easy to do. So now I'm going to show you how to install the grips. For the grips, if you may or may not have known, the grips feature something that's really rare to Airsoft, and that's able to use AEG, gas blowback, and real steel grips. As long as your grip has a center hole through it, you're able to use it. So I believe this is a gas blowback Magpul grip. Also have a K grip, and then I believe this is a real steel variant of something. So any grip that has a hole through it will work for you. Uses this furniture nut here that goes through that larger hole, and one bolt. This one's kind of tricky as well, but just like any other AEG with a motor grip, it's tricky as well, but eventually it'll go through like this. And then you take that furniture nut, it'll go through both sides, so you got to kind of hold it with both fingers, spin it so the hole where the screw goes through is kind of facing the right angle, and then you're going to take your grip, start threading it in. Should go, and then just like that, all done. You're going to want to line it up left and right, but it should line itself pretty good. And there we have a Magpul real steel gas blowback grip. AEG will also work, real steel will work, and anything with dovetail, beaver tail, whatever you want to call this thing back here, the contour is perfect on the lower receiver, so that'll work, or your standard straight 90, that'll work as well. I didn't mention when I was installing the V2 board and the wiring harness, I designed the lower so that the FCU will fit right in this little groove here, and it'll sit flush. And then it's up to you what you want to do with the wiring harness. They sell shorter ones, or you can route this to the back of the gun if you want, or you can put this in the grip, or you can put this in the slot and then route the wire through somewhere and then tuck everything up. It's up to you guys. I'm also going to do a little bit of tinkering around and find the best method for the FCU right here. Me personally, I'm probably going to run them in the back. I have something planned for the stock to make it easy and accessible, but it is possible to put the FCU here and put the battery in the grip. There's plenty of room, even with gas blowback and real steel. I know this video went on for way too long, but there was a lot that I had to go over, a lot of details, and I spent a good 30-40 hours designing this for all the features to work, like the ambidextrous safety, that is semi-locked and ergonomic, feels great. The adjustable trigger, the simulated brake to make it feel better than most HPA guns, the availability to use multitude of different grips, AEG, gas blowback, real steel, they'll all work. The slots for mounting, the compatibility to use V2 trigger boards, the micro switches or milsim units. Just a lot of time has gone into this, and this is probably very close to the final product. I'm happy with it. I spent a lot of time designing it, and now I've moved on to the back half of the gun, which is the stock and the mag well and the butt pad. I'm making that just as good as this, so that's going to be in the next video hopefully. But as always guys, I appreciate you watching these videos. It means a lot to me. Even if it's 5 of you guys, I appreciate it. And if you watch this far, you're interested in the kit, it's coming out very soon, at least the prototypes. The back half of the gun, that's the next video, and then after that hopefully it's assembly of the whole thing, shooting test and full in-depth video. But as always, thank you guys, I appreciate it. Peace out.